This is the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl, episode 260.
Yes, and
How you
this is
feeling on Independence Day, Tim? Like you
well. I
need,
mean, I mean, I
we
mean,
all need more independence.
the Supreme Court has ruled for extreme independence for the executive branch. I mean, I
Yeah,
mean,
well,
I mean,
I like the reply to that where Biden, if he had any balls, would take this opportunity to jail the orange ass clown and
there is
then
that.
and put people in the Supreme Court. I mean, thing is, Biden won't take the opportunity to do what now the other asshole wants to do. I don't get it.
But then they're hypocrites. But then the Republicans are allowed to be hypocrites. And so then I mean, I guess you could do an insurrection on the Supreme Court and say it was like it was a secure national security emergency. The Supreme Court's out of control, and let's storm the Supreme Court. I mean, and then pardon all of those people who did it in the name of the country and his commander in chief.
Well, look, I
Nothing's
mean,
illegal.
not only signs of things to come, signs of what is going down. Hello, France. You saw the riots there because of Le Pen. Germany, I mean, so many places. It's time to have factism, not fascism. That's going to be my new party. Factism.
They're doubling down on fascism. After these uh, industrial environmental disasters are participating
Yeah.
in global warming. I mean, when the Arab Spring happened, after basically we just completely took a baseball bat to a beehive in the Middle East. Like, why are they all here? And I was reading all these articles like, well, this is nothing yet. Wait till global warming. You're going to see insane migration. So
Factism, not fascism. Why are there so many immigrants?
exactly.
America's policy everywhere else. The brutality of governments that are fascist. We need factism. The question should be the answer. You mentioned beehive. I want to get right into it because this is terrifying. A man from Philadelphia found himself hospital bound after a bee stung him in his right eye. And
Eyeball.
this kind of sums up politics right now. We're getting stung in the fucking eyes, the ass and the ears. Our brains are melting from climate change. I don't know what else to say. Anyway, he had to go to the Will's Eye Hospital, and I mean, the bee went right into the extent that it was. I mean, they had to pull it out. The stinger was deep. Let's put it this way, lodged in place.
I mean, the
So
eyeball ruined.
it was a conjunctival injection, which is a great name for a band. Conjunctival injection, and it was and it infiltrated at the nasal limb. There was still a piece of retained stinger. Oh,
I mean,
watch out.
that's terrible luck. It's just it's like the eye, anything in the body that's not a tumor, that's a ball. All the balls I have in my body, I think hopefully just four, my eyeballs and my testicles.
Well,
I
mean,
hope I just want to leave those things alone.
they were able to
except
pull
for
out
them doing their job. Let's put it that way.
they were able to pull out the majority of the stinger, but then the small fragment could only be visualized with a really intense 10 or 16 time magnification glass and a light fluorescent dye, and then they pulled it out with micro forceps. The remaining
It's so weird when you have these kind of like little micro surgeries of like things that are just like
oh
sharp and can cause damage unless you really finesse it. It's like when you hear about like guys putting like light bulbs in their assholes and then they shatter and then they have to go to the emergency room, and it's just basically glass dust and with like these fine pinpoint tweezers you have to just painstakingly take every little thing out, and it just fucks you up forever. I don't know why you want to put a light bulb in your ass to begin with.
well,
if you want to put anything in your
knock
ass,
it till you try it.
Well, oh my god.
I mean, I'm surprised it doesn't break halfway up, but whatever.
Well, if you're
Anyway.
loose enough, it probably doesn't. I think it's probably upon closure. But
Well, there's so many other objects that would fit nicely up there. I can't imagine why.
well, that's
I love glass and steel, but I don't prefer ones that are that thin or shaped like a light bulb for the most part.
well, there's people that want the danger. I get it. It's like people who mutilate their
anyway.
genitals and
It's
stuff.
it's summer, so there's a lot of different attacks of all kinds, and I
Yes.
hear you have one coming up.
I'll start with a pretty simple one. A guy in Florida had his hand mangled. He was fishing off his boat and he was reeling in some fish, and then of course when he put his hand down with the gaff to get the fish out, the shark came and just chomped on it.
Yeah,
it was chasing the bleeding, oily fish, and he's alive, but he's like, I'm bleeding a lot, and they had to stitch him up. Now, one of our mutual friends, Tanya Pearson's friend, got attacked by a grizzly bear. Wyoming. And she wrote us today, and she's like, "Oh, here's a story. This guy Shane Patrick, who she claimed is like a conservationist, military veteran, backpacker, like a solid, guy. But
I know how to do it in the woods, guy.
Even the greatest of survivalists, when you come face to face with a grizzly bear, you better have a very powerful gun, and you better move fast. If you don't, you're just not. No. But he lived. But that's right. But his hand is all mangled. And then, of course, this reminded me. I've told this story, I think, before. One of my dad's great late scientist friends, a botanist from Chicago, and I used to visit him, had a cabin right on the rim of Yellowstone Park. And of course, that's where this guy Shane was attacked. That's where the grizzly bears are. The only grizzly bears are in that area of Wyoming, and I think only ones in continental United States. But because they've been reintroduced. One of my dad's friends, Erwin. What was Erwin's last name? Was it Everett? Yeah. We used to go. I'd do like these like summer road trips with my dad, and Erwin's like a Chicago's kind of intellectual scientist, and he would go to Yellowstone and he would work on all these plants, and then he would always have this tradition where you could work all day, and the hour before dinner was served, you'd go on a little hike in the woods. Well, this is like 10 years ago, and you can look it up. It's like a national story. He went and he never came back, and of course his wife was freaking out because this didn't seem normal. And she goes out, and there's these federal worker ranger type guys on horseback. Like, what are you looking for? Well, my husband, he didn't come back before she could finish her sentence. They bolted in a certain direction. Well, of course, he was killed by a grizzly bear. Of course, I don't know. I never found out. I'm gonna have to ask some family members, because my dad's dead himself, so he would be the guy to ask. She ended up suing the federal government for $5 million because this was part of a tagging study thing with the wildlife and games, I think. It's a subgroup of that. It's called something more specific. I'd have to look it up, where they're basically capturing the grizzly bears that have been reintroduced, because they're trying to study to see how that's working, tranquilize them, and they do little tests, and then they bring them back. Well, there's a whole very involved protocol to how you do it. They first lure them with like some kind of roadkill that's hanging from a tree, and then they have like this kind of their version of a heart trap that's not like one of the furring 19th century ones that kill them. So anyhow, this thing was brought back, and she basically claims, there's the whole thing, they wait for it to be awake enough, then they take off, but it can't really chase you. Well, this thing was really dizzy, and it wasn't really waking up, and they're like, they kind of had this thing, it's gonna be fine. At which point they took away all the signs that say, danger, you're entering a grizzly bear zone of being reintroduced into the wild. And of course, an angry and hungry and confused, coming out of a drug haze, grizzly bear, the first thing he sees is Irv, the scientist, and who is standing literally right, he didn't even realize it, under the limb, that was the limb of the tree that had the roadkill bait. Previous. He didn't even know. He's like, talk about wrong place at the wrong time. And he got killed. They eventually hunted down the one that killed him. And sure enough, Irv, the scientist's hair and flesh DNA was all over this fucking thing. So, and so I assume she sued him for $5 million. I'm sure, I bet you she got it.
The same can't be said for Noni, who went looking for his wife, Farida, who was found inside a 20-foot python in Indonesia.
Okay, yeah.
She had vanished while walking in the woods alone to the market. So, she's not coming back. So Noni, her husband, launched a frantic search with other locals, and she was found inside the body of a bloated snake, which was opened up with a machete, and she was confirmed dead just 2 days ago. And the thing is, the snake expert, Mark O'Shea, had spoken on the disturbing death, what was found inside the snake said, well, it at least would have been a very fast death with
Yeah.
blood squeezed to both ends of her body.
Well, yeah,
I mean,
she was squeezed to death, but I'm
yeah.
curious what that, after 2 days, what the inner enzymes that were slowly
Yeah.
digesting her, what did she actually look like at that point? I mean, a pickled human. I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty much what it is. It's a human pickle.
Exactly.
I mean,
20-foot python. I mean, damn, he could eat three of us in one go.
they had that 20+ foot python in the Bronx Zoo. I think finally passed away after many years. And I believe, I could be wrong, but I think I remember that thing escaped a couple times, and then like, oh, there you are. Like it somehow managed to, but then like it would take them a couple days, and then they'd see this kind of coiled up, thick thing, and like, it just wanted to hide in the corner and some little dark. Yeah. Well, you like basements, so it's like a basement. It just wanted to hang out, and be alone. Speaking of walking in the woods and it going bad, Church of Latter-day Saints children on one of their little church hikes in Utah, where they got just blasted by lightning. Of course.
Oh yeah.
No one died, but they're hospitalized and they're all fucked up. And of course, the narrative now of these 14-year-old idiots is that angels protected them. I mean, how do they know that God wasn't the lightning bolt on them?
Exactly.
And it was archangels that were protecting them. I mean, prove me wrong on that. How do they know it wasn't that situation? But
I don't know.
And then last current event story. This fucking hurricane category, I don't even know the name of it, Category 4 hurricane is surging through the crib.
Beryl Florida.
Yeah, that's right. Because there was that real estate agent named Beryl. That's why it's out of my mind. But so this is the thing for years, in the last 20 years, I guess the big thing that spooked the meteorologists is hurricanes are going much later into this season because the summer is so hot and the water staying warm for so long. Now it's bypassed that, where it never
coming in earlier,
and you never see Category 4s this early because the ocean never cooled down.
Yeah,
and so it's really it's like when you start losing in a race, and then it's so bad that you start getting lapped by the front runner. I mean, we're being lapped by this catastrophic global warming, folks. It's
one of the islands that it hit is completely. I mean, every building has been wiped out, just about.
Yeah, I mean, so if Category 4s are going to be the norm in June and early July, I guess Category 5s it's going to be like hurricane. Every hurricane is going to be a Katrina, like in September and October.
Yeah, I mean, now it's heading, of course, towards America, but it's a little early to say. But it looks like it's heading more towards Texas this time than Florida, which has had enough problems with its own heat dome.
Yeah, they don't want a Galveston Part 2, which was the biggest city in Texas until that hurricane that happened like 120 years ago made it destroy and they never came back.
That you mentioned Galveston, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but it's one of the best new pulp noir books I've read, written by the guy that wrote True Detective Season 1. I highly recommend it.
Well, it's called Galveston?
Called Galveston. Speaking about writers, we have Richard Cabot on the show, whose book, Looking for a Kiss, longtime music journalist, starting in the early 80s, a musician, has now written a book which I can only compare to punk dystopian novel, and I'm very happy to have him on the show, and he's going to read a couple of passages from us. So with no further ado, we are and always will be the most independent of independents, the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and a shout out to Simon Slater, Sebastian Greppo, who'll be joining us, Joey Kaneko. I mean, all of the people that help us just do what we do. Yeah. Big shout out to all of them. And we'll be rocking soon. And what's left of the free world, Tim?
Yes,
with our
we
big
will.
Sexy Noise cover.
Of course we will.
This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, And Richard Cabot, musician at one time, writer for various music magazines going way back, author, playwright. Happy to have you.
Lydia, I'm honored and amazed.
Oh,
Well,
cool. Cool.
amazed that we're both still here after all these decades.
Aha,
Yeah,
roar.
that could be
I
it.
think we
I'm
started
not sure.
around the same time. Let's start at the beginning with your musical forays, which started about, what was that, the early 80s, or was that before that even?
What the music?
Yeah.
Oh, the writing came before the music. The music was just kind of like an aside. I was a writer before anything, and in fact, that's how I got dragged into being a musician because I kind of this girl, this young woman, and well, I was working for the NME at the time, and I wrote about her band, and
What band was that?
should we mention the name? Do we
You
have to
can.
mention?
Hey, only if you want to.
Is it embarrassing the band, or just you don't want any problems from this person?
No, it's not. It's not a problem. It's just in the past. We can mention the name if you want. I wrote an article in the NME about 82, 83 called Positive Punk, and it featured a lot of kind of bands like Blood and Roses and Brigandage. And I was at the time I was with the young woman who played in Brigandage, and she kind of got booted out of her band, and she asked me to do it. But it was all tied into what I had written.
Yeah.
So
When
so
did you
I,
start writing for the music mags?
am I still writing for the music mags?
No,
No,
when did you start in like 81, 82?
I started writing in the late 70s. I wrote a fanzine called Kick, and my writing career really started. Which is kind of weird because well, the weird thing about it is I was in New York only about sort of 3 or 4 weeks ago. We were doing the kind of US launch of my novel, Looking for a Kiss. And the guy who printed my original fanzine, Kick, was a guy called Jolly McPhee, who printed fanzines in the Portobello Road for better badges. And guess who turned up to film the launch in America, in New York? It was Jolly McPhee. So it was kind of like a magical circle had been, formed. It was great. It was really
Full
nice.
musical circle, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it was
Was it
cool.
was it from your writing in the fanzine Kick that then you progressed to? And let's face it, there was a lot of great rock journalism because there was a lot of great music in the late 70s and early 80s, especially coming out of the UK.
Yeah, I started the fanzine. The thing about creativity is it kind of makes things happen for you. And through the fanzine, I kind of met a whole bunch of people, and I started squatting, and I became part of a squatting punk community. And it was through that really that I started writing for the NME, which at the time kind of sold probably about 150,000 copies a week. It was mega. Quite, and I front page features at the age of, well, I was in my early 20s, which was kind of cool. But I don't do it anymore. I kind of got bored. I got bored of having to have an opinion about everything.
Yeah.
And you get tired of having to have opinions. It becomes fake.
Well,
It's
you had bigger territory to conquer, like novels or plays or any number of things. Who were some of the first people you covered in, say, NME or whatever? Did you write for all three of those mags at the time? Melody Maker, NME, Sounds. They were all going. They were all of great interest, especially to somebody in America.
I wrote for the NME and I wrote for a series of magazines after that, including, have you heard of Zigzag magazine
Of
at all?
course, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I wrote for them and kind of tons of others, and then I wrote for the kind of I wrote for the BBC after that, which is a music thing. It's a cultural
So who were some of the
organization.
first bands you were covering?
Well, I was kind of, what they kind of like why they liked me initially was I wrote about a whole bunch of new bands coming up in the early 80s who I then as aforementioned, I wrote a piece about something called positive punk. And that featured a whole bunch of bands, like Southern Death Cult, which they they came to be called the Cult, and they're still kind of like hacking away, Ian Astbury and Billy Duffy, and there were the people like Bauhaus and Killing Joke, and in fact, all those kind of bands. This punk professor came along and recently, and he said, in positive punk, I was the first person to codify what became known as goth, with all that kind of sex and death and darkness
Imagery.
and
So when you said
yeah.
when you said you were the first, or people started paying attention to you because you were doing this quote unquote positive punk,
Yeah.
you were given the freedom to pick your own bands, or I mean, or do they tell you and you just happen to fall into this kind of trajectory?
No, I picked the bands that I wanted to go and see. I was kind of like I wasn't a proper critic. I never kind of saw myself as a proper critic, and I still don't see myself as a proper critic. I saw myself as someone who was creative and artistic, and I was part of a scene and a lifestyle, and that lifestyle was a squatting punk lifestyle, but an arty one, a creative one, not the kind of drossy sort of drug guys, I suppose. And I went to see a whole bunch of bands who were playing at the time. The aforementioned bands, there were loads of them, and they were kind of different from what else was happening in that in.
Magazine, Wire, Gang of Four,
Yeah, it
all
was well. This was
types.
kind of like the after a little bit after that. It was kind of like the youth, and I was a youth at the time, or yeah, kind of eternal youth, like
Oh,
all of us really. And so the editor of the NME said, "Look, what's the kind of common denominator here? Why are you writing about all these bands? What have they all got in common?" And I said, "Well, they're all kind of positive in their attitude because what else was going down at the time? It was kind of pretty negative with the kind of skinhead guys, the oi guys, and all the kind of crass anarcho sort of
yeah.
bands. And yeah, I like the crass people, but they were pretty sort of dismal in their own way, really. And the bands that I was writing about were kind of colorful and kissable, and
Kissable. That's a good
kissable,
one. I think if I ever tried to kiss Peter Murphy, he'd die of a heart attack. He was always terrified of me, but positively anyway.
Poor
I've
old
heard him
Peter, eh?
personally. But it's interesting that the bands that you just mentioned were under
Yeah,
the moniker that you considered positive punk, but it makes sense in relation to what you just said. The other
yeah,
side was happening, and especially around Thatcherism and all that, and just how negative too, just the state of the country, both the UK and America was in. I mean, both countries were in pretty dire straits
But
at that point.
aren't they more now than ever? And yet you're not. I guess the rebellion is something else. It's shutting down banks from your bedroom when you're 11 years old. Because you're mentioning all these bands in London, but then you have all this other stuff going on. You have like New Romantic and all this other crap going on. It's just that we're all very successful, like internationally successful in their own way, and it's kind of
yeah,
insane when you think about all these things that were happening in the London area at the time. And
yeah, yeah.
when I
No,
think
but
about music out of London now, I'm like,
Right.
I'm looking
Also,
around.
I think this about journalism at that point, not that all of it was positive, but really the point of it was to expose people, like-minded or otherwise, to actually what was going on, what the vibe was. It was, I mean, the British press became very critical at one point, like they would love you one minute and hate you the next. But the main point of journalism around that time, both at fanzines in the States as well, and we didn't
Yeah.
have an equivalent really of New Musical Express. I don't consider Rolling Stone or Spin the equivalent of that. We're just about exposing music that you hoped other people would relate to, that you understood has a little bit something different going for them.
Yeah. Well, I'd kind of say that I mean, really, although I was writing about bands, funnily, music was kind of like the least of it, really. It didn't really matter what music was. It was a soundtrack to a lifestyle, and it was the lifestyle that was the most important and the most interesting part of the
Right.
whole equation to me. And the bands were just kind of like in the background, and they were kind of enabling it. Um, and that's kind of really in the end the reason why it all kind of came crashing down, because the music wasn't that great. But it didn't matter, you kind of moved on. You kind of moved on to other stuff. I mean, the point of it was, and Tim mentioned the New Romantics, and I mean England at that time. Uh, was kind of like a dark and sort of dismal place, but I loved it. It was fantastic. It was like Malcolm said, it was kind of like a place where we could kind of truly create an environment in which we could run riot in, and create things in. And in a wider sense, when Margaret Thatcher deregulated the financial markets, that's when the money started coming in to England. It was, and that's when Euromantics also happened. It was they ran on the same energy, which
It
was
costs
kind
it
of,
costs a lot
that
of
sort of
money to look like a new romantic. Let's face it.
Although they're kind of
Also
being creative.
expensive.
They're kind of picking up scraps based on what I read. At least they're kind of picking up scraps and making it work. But
I
yeah,
was
and
in
of
London
course,
in 81, 82. I was there for 2 years. At that point, I was working with Roland S. Howard. So I know how bleak one aspect of it was, but also the creative community and just so many different kinds of music coming out. I mean,
yeah,
and they try to paint everything with a punk or with punk or goth titles, but the music was so diverse at that point, just in the ones that we mentioned, and then including like the next wave. I mean, Gang of Four, XTC, Magazine, Joy Division. I mean, whatever the lineage is, everything sounded completely unique to itself, unlike when you think of quote unquote punk rock. So there's not really a title that befits all of these bands that were happening at the time, the same
yeah,
way other titles fit types of music, like country music. I mean, there's a parameter it exists within. No Wave has a very tight parameter. But that
yeah.
period of music, even though it's painted as punk, I mean, it was so diverse and so unique unto each band.
Yeah, no, it's very true, and I mean that's an impressive thing, a lasting joy, eternal joy of punk rock. I suppose it's kind of forward motion, but I mean, the thing about the new romantics, for instance, is I mean, they did run on the same energy as the one that Thatcher created to kind of bring in the money into London, and that's when the culture became obsessed with flash and sort of the surface, if you like. Whereas I kind of prefer, but I mean London was kind of like it was decrepit and run down. There was kind of like fires burning in braziers in every corner. But it was beautiful in that sense. It was kind of like those German Truma films, rubble films, which were kind of like made after the Second World War when Germany was a kind of complete wreck, and it had that kind of darkness, but it was that kind of environment in
Richard
which,
wasn't. Sorry to interrupt, but wasn't.
yeah,
I mean, what I've read is wasn't basically the London New Romantic. Wasn't that appropriating what was coming out of Liverpool even before that, which was kind of like a way to disassociate themselves from how even more bleak it was up there. Um, so like Soft
Yeah,
Cell
maybe.
or all those bands like who are from up north, their kind of glam thing was kind of a rebellion against just something that was even bleaker. And like, wasn't it London that kind of redirected it in this kind of spend a lot of money consumption Thatcher world?
Well, I mean, if you want to get into the history of it, I mean, I suppose it all kind of started with Billy's club, which was kind of like based on playing David Bowie records, and then it was a club
The
called
the the, the
Blitz in
Blitz,
Co
the Blitz, yeah, yeah.
the Blitz in Covent Garden, which I kind of went to. Uh, by accident, really. I was kind of backstage with the Rich Kids at a Music Machine gig in '79, and they said, "Oh, we're going off to this place, come with us." So we
There were
went
so many
and had a
concerts to
look.
attend at that period from, say, even both in New York and the UK from 78 to 82. There were so many gigs to go to, so many nights of the week with interesting things happening. I mean, now you're lucky if you look at any calendar and you go, well, maybe once every however, you might go check something out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think people look at music and they treat music in a completely different way than we do now. I mean, I've got a couple of sort of youthful kids, and I mean, they don't care. I mean, they're never going to kind of like spend money on music or
Yeah.
invest too much
Well,
time in
Richard,
music. Or,
I have this is my theory as a musician and growing up as a
yeah,
little kid in the 70s and 80s, and as a little kid forcing my parents to drag me to shows and seeing this like huge spectacle. Um, my theory is why it's different and why the culture feels different is a lot of people went to these shows, performances, not for the music, like you're kind of talking about yourself. A lot of people went there
yeah,
to get laid, to score drugs, to meet people, like-minded people, because this
For
band
the
represented
community.
a community that they could have conversations they connect with. And now with
yeah.
laser precision, with social media and all the services to deliver sex and drugs and people that you are like-minded, you can. It's like I've said this before. It's like I want to puke on this dog's face with a woman next to you with her shirt off. And guess what? It's going to happen because they're around the corner right now and they want to do the same thing. And to even broach that conversation at a show, you get punched. So basically, you take away all of those elements, and what's left is the music. Well, it's a little quiet suddenly.
When you get it for free, why are you going to go out and pay? But I mean, the thing is, I don't know about you, but I don't remember ever paying for gig to get into gigs. Well, especially not from a teenager when I forced my way into knowing the promoter that was booking all the concerts in my hometown. But I don't remember ever paying for gigs anywhere. But maybe because if you were in a band, they just let you in. I guess if you were a journalist in a band, they let you in, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was the only good thing about being a music journalist at the time because it wasn't anything, there wasn't any money involved.
No.
It was all kind of you got free drinks occasionally, and you got into gigs free, and you got free records, and also it was good for the ego, which is kind of like why people did it. Look, there's my name. Look how important I am. That that
So
that
what
kind of
what
thing.
neighborhoods were you living in London during this period?
Well, swatting.
Yeah.
At that time,
Yeah.
I was living in I started when I started writing for the NME. I was living in a road called New North Road, which went from Old Street up to Essex Road, which is kind of Islington. And I was squatting at the time, and I changed my name to write for the NME to Richard North after New North Road. And again, it was kind of like one of those, t dark, dismal kind of places. London was unreconstructed, and especially that area at
Especially
the
Islington
time.
then, nothing like it is now for sure.
No, I mean, Islington was really violent. Everywhere around there was really violent. It was very white. It was very working class, although most people didn't kind of work. And I remember getting mugged for 26 and a half pence outside my squat. And it was all the money I had in my in the world, really. And I had, I was kind of like this punk rocker with hair everywhere, and this guy came up to me and said, "Give me your money." I said, "Are you kidding?" And he said, pulled out his knife, which
Yeah.
I kind of guessed that he wasn't kidding, really. And I dug into my
You
pocket,
pulled out your
gave him my
26p.
26 and a half p, and off he went, really happy. And I used to get bricks thrown through my window in the squat by the kind of tramps who used to live in the house, who were annoyed that these punks came along and took away his abode. So hey, sorry about that, tramps,
No,
but
no. And now you live in
what are you
Camberwell.
gonna
You're saying you're living in Camberwell right now, right?
Well, no, I'm not actually. That was a slip of the tongue. I'm living in a place called Onroke Park, which isn't too far away. It's in southeast London. Yeah.
Is that like near Broccoli or I'm trying to think of a map.
Yes, it is. How did you know
Whoa!
that?
Tim Dahl
I
knows everything. He just does. He's like a
well,
walking encyclopedia of information. I have no idea. He pulls things out of
well,
thin air.
I mean, check,
Amazing.
but check this out because there is a because I'm a musician. I play all different stuff, and
Yeah,
years
yeah.
ago, I don't know if it still exists. There was a series in Camberwell called Jazz of the Crypt, and it was jazz in the basement. It was in a crypt. It might still exist of this church, St. Giles Church,
I
and
know it.
they used to have funding, and I could, if I was doing a little jazz tour, I knew the guy that was running it, and he would
Yeah.
get me funding. I'd just go over on the ferry and play
But
this
what
gig.
years was that, Tim?
This is 20 something years ago. So,
They still have gigs there.
so there because they have the
That's
art
the
school
job.
there. You have the art school there, and so kids would come but this is about you, but a real quick story. So check this out. So the
Yeah.
very first time I played there, because this is before Google Maps and stuff, and you'd have these paper maps and you'd be touring around. And
How did we even do it? I have no way. We still can't figure out how we did it by paper maps.
so we're driving, and basically, this is some of my very first tours, and so my general rule was, okay, just go to the center and then we'll figure it out. Well, London, go to the center. What the fuck is this? So we're doing like the M20 or whatever. We're coming up from Dover, and so then we're coming up through London that way. And I don't know what happened, but I was just like, go left, go right, like going into London, just doing random, like go left,
Yeah,
go
yeah.
right. And we're getting it's getting thicker, and we're getting into Camberwell, and I said,
Yeah.
maybe we should start asking for directions. I pull into a gas station. I go, do you know this address out of all of London? And he goes, yes. And he points across the street. I just randomly stopped driving to London, and I was across the street from the St. Giles Church in Camberwell. So
You were meant to be there. You were meant
Well,
to
like
get
I was
I
meant to be
said,
there.
Tim Dahl knows just about everything. We would just pull into town and hire a taxi to lead us to wherever we needed to go, which was a very smart move. So, Richard, are
Yeah,
you
right.
still friends with any of the other writers from the time, or any of the musicians that you were most attracted to in the early '80s? Do you have you maintained any friendships with any of these characters?
Um, yeah, I mean, the thing about the enemy is, and again, I always kind of like throughout my whole life, I kind of saw myself as an outsider. I mean, I was brought up. My parents came from were both Polish. I came from a Polish background. I didn't speak English when I went to school.
Wow.
And
So
and
you were born in Poland?
No, I was born in England, but my parents spoke Polish in the house, and I didn't. When I went to school, I didn't know what the hell they were talking about because I'd never heard it before. So I always kind of felt that I was an outsider, and I, I was an outsider from that kind of society, and I was kind of like an outsider from the Polish society as well, which is kind of
Of
like
course.
Polish Catholic society. I mean, I didn't, all that kind of stuff drove me absolutely crazy. But I always kind of considered myself as an outsider at the NME. As I said, I didn't really enjoy being a critic. I didn't kind of like hang out and,
Some
talk
of
about
my favorite
music
writers
with
are
those
Polish.
guys. So,
Some of my favorite writers are Polish: Tadeusz Konwicki, Bruno Schulz, Witkiewicz, which also painted as with Casey. I love going to Poland.
Yeah,
I love the films of Poland as well, but it
yeah,
must have
yeah.
been really tough in London as a child speaking Polish.
Well, now, I mean, also, I mean, could you imagine now? Brexit, a lot of that was based on the anti-Slavic kind of racism. Like they're coming and taking our jobs.
Yeah, there was all that kind of stuff,
Well,
right?
I'm
Yeah,
still friends. I'm still friends with some journalists that I met around that period, like Kathy Unsworth is a very good friend of mine, who, like yourself, graduated from rock journalism to writing books. Hers like crime novels based on true events, or her latest book, Season of the Witch, on goth. And Chris Bond, who runs the Wire magazine, is still a very good friend of mine. He helped me out incredibly throughout my career, just in helping me organize stuff. So that's why
Um,
I'm asking. But these are
yeah,
people I
right.
met through
Yeah,
journalism.
I mean those people I know and love. I mean, Kathy and I have done events together very recently, looking for Kirsten's Season of the Witch events in
Yeah,
London over the
perfect. Right,
past
because both
months.
of your yeah.
We've Chris, I'm still very much in touch with via email. I haven't seen him for physically for a long time, but
Who was that with Chris Bond? You mean?
Chris,
Yeah, he's the one that turned me on to a lot of Polish writers or Eastern European writers
yeah,
by recommending Quartet Encounters. He always brings books. Just, I mean, these are really great, important people, and who, like yourself,
yeah,
started in journalism. And we're still waiting for Chris Bond's book, but we know Kathy is just, I mean, amazing. She was at one of my spoken word shows and fainted, fortunately caught by Billy Chainsaw, and claimed that I opened
did
her third eye with a spoken word performance. We're thick as thieves, we are.
did your
why?
family
Yeah,
leave?
Kathy.
Sorry,
Sorry.
sorry. No, go ahead. Finish about Kathy.
Uh, yeah. Um, I was just going to say Kathy's great.
Oh, did your
I love
family
her.
leave Poland in World War II?
They were living in eastern Poland at the time, which is now part of Ukraine.
Ukraine, yeah.
And what happened was that when the Nazis invaded Poland, shortly afterwards, the Russians invaded from the other side, from the
Oh, I
east.
know.
So my parents' families were ethnically cleansed from their land and transported by cattle truck along with 200,000 other Poles, which kind of grew over the next year into like 1 million Poles to Soviet labor camps in
Yep,
Siberia,
yep.
which is what happened, which entailed a lot of death and hardship and all the above. But when the Germans invaded Russia, then the Russians kind of turned around and said, "Well, we didn't kind of mean it really." And hey, guys, you're free to go. And a Polish army was formed under the auspices of the British, based in Palestine. So my parents, my dad ended up going to fight in the army, and my mum's family kind of everyone went to the Middle East because that's where the Polish army was. That was the kind of focus, and then via the Middle East, Palestine and Persia, which is now Iran.
Iran.
Um, they ended up in refugee camps in Uganda. So, and then after that,
What?
yeah, and it's weird. And then and then they had a choice of where to go, and they ended up in the UK, which is
It's
where,
incredible that you know your history, because so many people don't know, even beyond our grandparents, what happened. And I wonder
yeah,
if that's a blessing or a horrible curse. Like, for instance, Just last night, I showed a documentary I made with Jasmine Hurst, Artist Depression, Anxiety, and Rage. And we talk a lot about
Yeah.
genetic or historical trauma that's in the bloodline that people might not even recognize that that's part of what they're depressed or have anxiety about or rage about. And do you feel that in knowing all of this, I mean, has it spared you any? We know as an permanent outsider, as basically all three of us are, and almost everybody on this podcast. But do you feel that in knowing that horrific history, which most of us do share some form of horror in our history, maybe not as horrible as what you just thank you for sharing it, but do you feel that has influenced your psychological well-being throughout your life? And then henceforth, positive punk was important. I know I'm trying to bring that circular around, but
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and you're really onto something. I think that the idea of generational trauma certainly exists, and I suffer very much from anxiety and sometimes insomnia, uh, and for no apparent reason. And I kind
but we
of
know the reason is actually absolutely fucking apparent because you've just voiced it. And
yeah
I think it's something that people have to, hence why I made this documentary, because I mean, there's many reasons to have depression or anxiety. We don't need to list them all now, but
yeah
it is in our blood. All war is in our
yeah
blood. The war
yeah
is never over. And people, process that differently, and without even realizing that they are polluted by all of history's agonies. We're heirs to the frickin' flagellants. This has been one of my,
yeah
bullhorn cries since I opened my mouth. And like Tim knowing where Camberwell was, it's something I just intrinsically knew. So therefore, I don't suffer depression or anxiety because I had the awareness of where a lot of this comes from, and also in being able to just focus more on my rage, which is at a much greater patriarchal level than a personal level. It spared me a lot of trauma, but that I had to make a documentary addressing all my friends'
yeah
traumas for
no
any number of reasons.
no, absolutely, and I mean, my other book, which is called Disorderly Magic and Other
How are you going to
Disturbances.
read from that?
I'm not going to read from this. I'm going to read from
You're
Looking
going to
for
give us a
Kiss.
reading in a second. Go ahead. Tell us more. You were saying
But
your book.
this, but
Announce the title again, Richard. I'm sorry. Announce the title.
this book is Disorderly Magic and Other Disturbances, and it's on Far West Press, an American publisher based in Hudson, upstate New York. And I kind of excavate that family history in that book in a poetic form. So, and the other book, Looking for a Kiss, is part of what you're talking about, the anger and the outrage. So I have both of those avenues too, I must admit.
I'm going to send you my documentary when we're done with this interview. By the
Well,
way,
that sounds great, Lydia.
I recommend Jerry Stoll's book 999, where he, as a depressed, anxiety-ridden, and rageful Jew, visited the concentration camps. And a
Yeah,
beautiful takeaway just from that, because he's a hilarious and great and heavy writer, is
yeah,
he's standing in one of the concentration camps, and he's just like, "Am I an asshole? I'm worried about my previous divorces, my kids, and I'm standing on the graves of I don't even know how many people." So I really recommend this book too, as somebody that shares a similar dilemma just in
yeah,
the existence of our history. So
yeah.
let's I don't want to say lighten the moment because that's not true, but why don't you give us a reading from one of your latest book, and
Okay,
let's just enjoy a little bit of
okay.
let's early
So,
summer poetry.
right. Well, this is from Looking for a Kiss, which is out on PC Press, and it's available kind of it's distributed widely, but it's also on the PC Press website, which is Googleable, and for American people listening, then they're just finalizing American distribution as
Fantastic.
we speak, which is kind of Cool.
Give us a go.
And I've chosen. You asked me to choose a couple of readings. Shall I do them both, or shall I do
Just start with
one?
one and then we'll talk a little and then we'll finish with another.
Okay. All right then. Well, this first one is just to give a kind of like a little bit of background. The book is set in the early 80s, a time when punk had finished, and it's it's a chronicle of speed, madness, and flying saucers, and that's Andy Warhol, Edie Sedgwick reference, and a couple of young punks, Robert and Marlene. They're afloat but barely in the post-punk 80s, and they take acid by the side of the Regent's Canal in London, and the book follows the couple's progress as Robert reflects on the past and projects into the future. Seeing and experiencing and meditating on breakup, breakdown, desire, drugs, clairvoyance, melancholy, punk, what has once become a way of life has become a dead end, and the original sense of transcendence has become a quagmire, pop art, primal scenes, primal screams, uh, all sorts of stuff. And
That was a
this
beautiful poetic description to begin with.
and
Please,
this
please carry on.
this chapter, it's from a chapter called the Under the Thrall of Forgetting, and the couple have just been to see the film Withnail and I.
Fabulous.
And
Take it away.
it begins like this, and this is a very short excerpt from that chapter. Robert and Marlene were eternal youngsters, keen to live in a film, overwhelmed by the idea, but knowing that in one way or another it wasn't real and would have to finish. The end credits. At the start, Robert and Marlene were in lust with autonomy, abandon, and deliverance. They vibrated with youth, an economic design not particularly calculable in age. They were amongst those who were through, for instance, apathy, disgust, drunkenness, disaffection, omitted from the fiscal life of society, and who sometimes saw themselves as auguries of freedom from tradition, family, labor. Youth has nothing to lose but its sense of adventure. They were in tune with their universe. There was no end to their thirst and hunger for desire. Their passion for the world, for their world, was limitless. Robert and Marlene thought that they could see what real life could offer, euphoria and elation. They lived on and for craving. Youth is all about wanting. Wanting what? What have you got? They proceeded to attempt to achieve their dream of complete and permanent personal, cultural, and spiritual intoxication and glory by wasting time. They only picked at their art. They thought they would be forever young, so to them time was of little consequence. However, it was the world which grew older around them. Robert and Marlene, after a while, became fearful about a non-existent future. They were both free with free time, but, they wondered, free for what? The couple had managed to suspend and set aside the impact of the unfolding years, the thought of which left them shaken and petrified. In their hearts and souls, they realized the truth. The blind universe doesn't give a fucking shit, and nothing, absolutely nothing exists until you yourself make it. But they did not know how to make much apart from the peril and pitfall for themselves. They suffered from paralysis. They could not reinvent themselves or fight back against a dangerous foe. because that foe was, of course, themselves. Punk had glamorized concepts such as chaos and blankness, but when Robert and Marlene started living out the words that had previously been written in biro or felt tip on their t-shirts, they found it almost unbearable. No future. We are not in the least afraid of the ruins. In fact, the ruins petrified them. Robert knew that it would not be easy for the hapless couple to navigate themselves out from the debris of their own deflated dreams, to free themselves from their own story. He looked at it coldly and objectively, the unfolding story. Ultimately, it was the question of what lay under the surface, unknowable, that was so beguiling, raising questions which should be routine, like why, oh, why must the world consist of tearing and grinding that approximates the rage and sadness of breakdown and faded emotions? Robert said to Marlene, I have of late, but whereof I know not, lost all my mirth. And indeed, it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory. She said to Robert, oh, shut the fuck up. For fuck's sakes, just for once, shut the fuck up. Fucking idiot. She didn't want to fucking hear it.
So beautiful and so to me reminiscent of the first time I read 1984 by George Orwell.
Yeah, 1984.
I
Wow,
mean,
great.
I mean, I have goosebumps. It's so beautifully written about this dystopian mindset that is going to befall idealist young people. And I
Yeah.
thank you so much for that passage. It was really fantastic.
Well, thank you very much, Lydia. I mean, it goes back to that idea of the 80s where you know money came in all of a sudden and people wanted to sell out. And I write about people. They also really wanted to sell out. You know, we wanted to sell out, but nobody was buying what we had. They didn't want it, you know?
I always wanted to sell up, but there was no selling out because nobody wanted it.
Yeah.
And anyway, I owned it all myself from the very beginning because I'm like, I speaking about being outside. Oh yeah, I'm out fucking side. And I don't even refer to the Bowie album, which is one of his better later albums, I think based on the writings of Derek Raymond.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
to say, and Diamond Dogs being one of my favorite albums of all time based on 1984, just to say. So I appreciate that chapter very much. Thing is, what's amazing to myself about myself, besides everything, is that I am not at all jaded. I never was jaded
Right.
because I don't know whether it's if my ego is so secure that I know what I'm doing is something I was called upon to do. It always changes, and there are other people I will continue to do it with. And the goal is to create. And we never thought anybody would buy it. And anytime anybody comes anywhere or buys anything, we're very happy to have them because they
But
must be truly freaking
Lydia,
weird.
could I present this idea? I mean,
Please do.
uh, when was your first real heartbreak? And the thing is, do people chase the constant heartbreak, or is it this kind of quote unquote first cut is the deepest, and you're kind of like, okay, you move
Oh,
on.
you know
And
what?
if you have an
That's
earlier heartbreak,
a beautiful question, Jim. I would say I probably created more heartbreak than had them because of my secure nature. I don't know. Creative. I never had a creative heartbreak, first of all.
sure.
I may have worked with one or two people that were heartbreakers just because they didn't love themselves enough. They didn't learn the lesson that I tend to preach, which is come on. You must be here for a purpose. And if you respect me at all, not as if I'm the grand judge or jury, I'm calling upon you to be the best you can be and do whatever you want to do within this coven. So heartbreak, nothing I focus on. Can't even remember it. I tend to be more of a heart mender. You may have noticed, Tim, knowing me as you do.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Richard, I mean, this thing about when you kind of the sad romantic, I'm just talking about just this general character, nothing to do with your writing or you or anything like that, but just do people, you know, they become jaded, you know, they have this heartbreak and they just kind of go on and they, okay, this is reality, you know, I was served it hard and I just move on, versus some characters who constantly get heartbroken and I don't know.
You know what, Tim, I'm going to answer that for 1 minute. Other people's sabotage breaks my heart for them.
Sure.
Like, I'm like, why are you sabotaging yourself? And again, it's like, I wish people could see themselves through my eyes. It's like, you know, and I know, again, back to the documentary, there's so many reasons that people are compounded or miserable or jaded or disillusioned or disappointed. But and it's not always a choice, but sometimes you just have to really turn your fucking head around like The Exorcist and see it from the other side of all dimensions. If you want to strive and thrive instead
but you know, I guess with depression, and Richard, please come in at any point with this as we're kind of rolling with this, because your writing kind of actually triggered all this. You know, this conversation. I mean, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the book is about heartbreak, and it's about how a cultural arc intersects with a personal arc of two people at a time when both those arcs are on a downward slope, when they're on a point of reaching that particular bottom. And it's about the heartbreak of the end of punk, which is something that both those characters had invested all their emotion into, and it's about the heartbreak of the end of their relationship. And when those two things clash, well, when they meet rather, then
it's the ultimate.
That's when the book happens. And well, really, it's kind of like, I mean, every story is kind of like somebody's story, and this story really, it's about the guy Robert, and it's about how he overcomes his self-loathing to activate the future. And you're right, you magically move on and regain that lust. You regain that belief in the wider creative sense in the world. And in the book, he actually comes to realize that in New York.
I'm going to add this to that so much of this kind of disappointment, whether it's inherited, whether it's genetic, whether it's existential, or the joy also, is it so much whatever is put in you or upon you, or you take in, as opposed to what my specific talent is I have it come from within, hoping to elevate other people, as opposed to being so devastated from what is from without that's attacking or that's dissolving or disappearing or failing. So I think that's what really kind of divides me as a human being, even though the way I focus my art is, of course, really trying to understand the negative side of many things. But personally, I'm extremely optimistic, I guess, because I have faith in myself, which I wish more people had faith in themselves, and didn't need an outside reaffirmation, or didn't or realize that so much of the problems they have could be from sources that they had nothing to do with, that were put upon you by your parents or your great grandparents, or existential angst, or the political situation.
Well, that's where I want to go, because Richard was talking about this earlier, and what you've inherited and all this stuff and traumas. You know, I've the amount of times I've been in a situation where I'm looking at the exact same situation as someone to my right or left, and how they see it, which is so just already defeated before you get out the fucking door. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Positive. Tim and I are both very positive people, which is strange. Nobody would think, oh, well, Lydia Long, most positive person I've ever met. but it is only because I'm positive about what comes from within, because that's in the end all we fucking have. So love yourself, motherfuckers. Love
But
yourself.
why
And if you
why
don't
is it
like
severed?
yourself, correct it.
Why is it separate for some? I mean, with like depression or certain anxieties, I know some people just they can't help it. I'm literally 100. I'm 180 degrees. Like some people who just can't get out the door are out of bed.
There's a million reasons.
I'm the other. I'm like, hey, let's do it. And unless of course, I'm hungover as fuck, and those are the only times I can be like, oh
no,
god.
there are a million reasons people cannot help it, and I'm not condemning that. I'm just saying if people really have to go inward and try to extract what was put upon them, placed upon them, is within their bloodline, and realize that there isn't always a choice.
Well,
But when you understand the parameters of the imposition upon the individual and you can extricate yourself from that, there might be some kind of freedom.
that you help with. So Lydia helps with that a lot. My mom's she's in the mental health biz, let's put it that way. And
I have my own asylum. It's everybody I know.
I mean, when she talks about like psychoactive medication, of course, there's some people that really, really need it, but she claims it's overprescribed because, for the most part, it should be used as a reminder of your brain saying, "Hey, you can actually see from this angle," rather than a dependency for your whole life. Just a little jump start, a reminder, and so if I'm around people who are really in the dumps, who I really care about, it's kind of like that's what I want to do. I want to like, hey, let's check it out from this. It doesn't always work, but that's my natural reaction.
But at least we give it the gold Brooklyn share. Richard, why don't we have another reading? And
yeah,
I'm so glad you're on this podcast. Thank you.
Thank much. You stimulated this conversation, Richard. You got us going here. So you've reminded us of this whole
existence. Matters. These are very important subjects. We managed to capture it in a novel.
It's weird because there are actually kind of like sections in the novel which echo exactly what you've been saying, including the couple have what they call sadness sessions, where they purposefully try and make themselves feel sad because they understand that happiness is a kind of like an artificial construct that's kind of made to make you feel
just
a function.
Bland and
misery is what I do in my coven. I like to try to prevent misery, and just it's not that I don't have the happy disease, but there are so many things to be thankful for, to appreciate. There is so much beauty. There are so many great people. And when you deny yourself, you deny yourself for a million reasons. People can't help it. But anyway, let's have another read.
Okay,
Richard Cabut, reading once again. Here we go. Thank you.
So this is from a chapter called "Speed is Frozen," and part of the book. In fact, an American critic, he kind of said that one of the things that he liked about it was the way that the book collapses temporal sensations, and yeah, the book works on a temporal and spatial level. The character Robert can see ahead into the future, and in this chapter, he sees himself as he is in the future, not too far in the future, but he's kind of doing things like having sex and taking speed and putting on a New York Dolls record to
shit.
to set the context.
Fun stuff.
And the chapter it begins like this. Robert in Camden was able to see his future self writing about himself in his diary, and those events being written about all at the same time. Quite a trick. But watching himself in this way didn't detract from the concrete composition, depiction, and understanding of the scene. It hit Robert like a smack in the eye, or rather, speed in the eye. Robert's gaze was not at all detached or diluted. Time's unfathomable distance. He thought, it is beautiful but repugnant and banal, of course. He wished he could take a photograph. The scene might make a good book cover. Art in the aesthetic sense, taut, narcissistic, sinuous, glam, and sexual. focused on a silver otherness, art that challenged perception of at source disappearance, nothingness, art and speed, the underground, underworld, pallor and pose of decadence. Robert, in all his temporal positions, was something through which that idea passed. I need a fix and a kiss, Robert thought. I'm not looking for a fix. I want to be fixed. The dolls weren't singing about drugs at all. They were singing about fucking redemption. Robert watched the scene and himself write about it and felt as though he were blurring the line between observed and sensed experience. Amaranthine time. He felt the heartbeat at the speed of the clock, at the speed of his cock, the speed of speed. Context abridged within place and time, cool, collapsed emotions within amplified imagination, reclining into the deterioration, digging the vein, digging the girl, or the thought of a girl. Elegant, cold gratification in nothing but the deep interest in a strangeness of which, in the howling infinities, we are all constituted. Robert, the one being secretly observed by himself, felt weird, like he was being haunted. There was definitely a presence. He sensed foreboding. There was a ghost here, a ghost of a chance. Robert the observer believed, like Jacques Derrida, that the future was full of ghosts. It belonged to ghosts, to the apparitions and those they haunted with their images. Robert felt he would like to stand and watch and film Marlene as she destroyed herself with drugs, resentment, jealousy, hate, self-loathing, crime, and self-pity. He would not help, just record the story as it unfolded. His aloof creativity would excuse him from accusations of callous exploitation. Yes, just like Andy. Robert thought, this film is about art, sex, and speed and time. The skinny picture and action streams and leaks, visual isolation, curious enthrallment beyond image and attraction, subverted and fixed hallucination, imagined literal time, temporal senselessness and helplessness created by the meaning. Sorry, some other time. Frustration, carnal and obscene. Poetry, yeah. Robert had it all worked out, a surefire hit. The theme of voyeurism and meditation on the same was a given. Robert, storyteller and self-described auteur, would, while watching, not miss a single detail. Robert finished watching both himself, writing about the scene and the scene itself, and concluded, my vision and my cock were always clean. What more can anyone else ask for? Nothing, huh?
So much. That's really
Well,
freaking
thank you.
gorgeous. Richard, that's just, I mean, I have goosebumps. You almost reduced me to tears. I'll save them for later. That was really fucking beautiful. The book is called Looking for a Kiss, which, by the way, I ran away because of the New York Dolls the first time, and that they're referred to there, both in the title and the passage you just read, is absolutely fantastic. I can't wait to meet you in a couple of
Thank
months.
you, Lydia. We'll meet in New Cross Gate at
And
I
we'll
think.
and we'll cheer each other on. Absolutely.
Yeah, we will. We'll
This,
do a happiness session, not a sadness session. Huh?
I'm thrilled every minute I'm still alive, and I will probably be, as I predicted, at the age of 20, the oldest living woman of rage. But my rage is a big one. It's not a small one. I say take the rage to the stage and then get paid. This is the
Yeah.
Lydian Spin, Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Richard Cabot. Please check out his books, and really a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you, Lydia, and thank you, Tim. It's
Thank you,
been
Richard.
a real pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Likewise.